The courtroom was unnervingly silent as 5-year-old Emily Carter stepped through the heavy wooden doors, her tiny hand clutching the leash of Rex, a German shepherd with a long, jagged scar running along his side. Every eye in the room followed the small girl as she made her way toward the witness stand, her movements hesitant but determined. Judge Mark Sullivan, a seasoned man with years of legal experience, leaned forward slightly, observing the child with a measured gaze. He knew that the weight of the entire case rested on her fragile shoulders. Emily was the sole witness to an attempted abduction, a case that, if won, could put a dangerous man behind bars for life. But there was one problem. Emily hadn't spoken a single word since the attack. Across the courtroom, Richard Hale sat at the defense table, his expression composed, even smug. A 45-year-old software engineer with an unassuming appearance, Hale had been arrested after an eyewitness placed him at the scene of Emily's attempted abduction. But his defense was solid: no physical evidence, no confession, and a witness who couldn't testify. His lawyer had already crafted a strategy that hinged on discrediting the traumatized child's ability to identify him. But then something happened. As Emily settled onto the witness chair, her green eyes met Richard Hale's. Her small fingers trembled as they made a subtle movement, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. It was a silent signal, one she had learned over weeks of therapy. Only two beings in the room caught it: Rex and Judge Sullivan. Rex's reaction was immediate. The moment Emily's fingers twitched in that silent plea for help, the dog's body went rigid. His ears pricked forward, his muscles coiling like a loaded spring. A low guttural growl rumbled from deep within his chest, a sound of warning, of recognition. His golden-brown eyes locked onto Hale, unwavering and piercing. The reaction sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. A murmur spread through the spectators, whispers of speculation filling the air. Something about the dog's behavior struck a chord. This wasn't just a well-trained support animal reacting to his handler's distress. This was something deeper, something primal. Judge Sullivan's hand came down hard on the gavel, the sharp crack echoing like thunder through the room. "This court will take a 15-minute recess. Shipaidizo," he declared, his voice unusually urgent. Prosecutor Jenna Collins shot him a questioning look, but he didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he glanced at Emily, who clung to Rex like a lifeline. Something significant had just happened, and he needed to understand exactly what it was before the trial proceeded any further. As the courtroom emptied, Sullivan remained seated, his mind racing. He had seen many things in his years on the bench, but never had a therapy dog reacted with such undeniable certainty. What had Rex recognized? And, more importantly, what did that mean for the case? Outside in the hallway, Emily knelt beside Rex, her tiny hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, bent down beside her, smoothing back the child's curly hair with trembling fingers. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she whispered. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her grip on Rex tightened, her small frame pressing into his side. Jack Monroe, the lead investigator on the case, watched from a few steps away. A grizzled FBI agent with decades of experience, Monroe had a gut instinct that had served him well over the years, and right now his gut told him that whatever had just happened in that courtroom was a game-changer. He stepped closer to Judge Sullivan. "Something spooked that dog," he murmured, his voice low. "I'd bet my badge he recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Then we need to find out where." Meanwhile, inside the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat across from his attorney, Michael Graves. The moment they were alone, the smug confidence on Hale's face twisted into something else, something colder. His fingers drummed against the table as he replayed the moment in his mind. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog had reacted. "She knows," he muttered under his breath. Graves raised an eyebrow. "What?" Hale forced a small smile. "Nothing," he said. But his mind was already racing. That damned dog. He hadn't considered the animal would be a problem, but now he realized Rex might be the key to unraveling everything. As the 15-minute recess neared its end, Judge Sullivan straightened his robes and took a deep breath. He didn't believe in coincidences, and right now, something told him that Rex had just given them the most important clue of the trial. It was time to dig deeper, and for the first time since the case had started, he felt the tide shifting. "Twitch." Laura turned back to Emily. "You don't have to come close if you don't want to. Rex will wait right here. But if you feel ready, you can put out your hand, and he'll come to you." Emily hesitated for long moments. She remained frozen in place. Then, inch by inch, she stepped out from behind her mother, her tiny hand lifted, hesitant but deliberate. Rex remained still, waiting for the final cue. When Laura nodded, he slowly lowered his head and took a careful step forward, then another and another. The moment his warm breath touched Emily's palm, something shifted. Emily's fingers curled slightly, brushing through the dog's thick fur. The connection was made. Sarah gasped softly, pressing a hand to her mouth. It was the first time Emily had reached out to anything or anyone since the attack. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Baby." Emily's small fingers burrowed deeper into Rex's fur, gripping him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned terrifyingly uncertain. Laura smiled. "That's a good girl, Emily. Rex likes you." The child said nothing, but she didn't let go. Over the next few weeks, Rex and Emily became inseparable. At home, she would sit beside him for hours, her tiny hands tracing the scar along his side. When nightmares woke her in the middle of the night, it was Rex's steady heartbeat that calmed her. Though she still refused to speak, she began drawing again, simple crayon pictures of a girl and a dog, standing together against shadowy figures. One afternoon, while sitting on the floor of Laura's office, Emily was watching Rex perform a simple trick when something remarkable happened. "Good boy," she whispered. The words were so soft that for a moment Sarah thought she had imagined them. But when she turned, she saw Emily staring at Rex, her lips slightly parted in wonder, as if she too had surprised herself. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Laura placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "She trusts him," she murmured. "Sometimes trust is the first step toward finding your voice again." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Then we'll follow wherever that trust leads." And it would lead them somewhere they never expected, to a courtroom where a monster would finally be unmasked. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. The seats in the gallery were filled with journalists, families, and legal observers, all watching with anticipation as one of the most high-profile trials in recent memory was about to begin. In the center of the room, the defendant, Richard Hale, sat beside his attorney, his expression unreadable. Despite the weight of the charges against him, he appeared disturbingly calm, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished wood of the defense table. Seated beside her mother, Emily Carter clutched the leash of Rex tightly, her small fingers wrapped around the thick fabric as if it were a lifeline. The German shepherd sat alert beside her, his ears pricked forward, his deep brown eyes locked onto Hale. Every so often his nose would twitch as if he were scenting something familiar in the air. "All rise." The bailiff's voice rang through the chamber as Judge Mark Sullivan entered, his robe flowing behind him. He took his seat at the elevated bench, his sharp eyes scanning the room, before settling briefly on Emily and Rex. He had already ruled that the therapy dog could be present, but he knew that decision was far from universally accepted. "Before we proceed with opening statements," Sullivan said, his deep voice measured and controlled, "the court will hear arguments regarding the presence of the support animal in these proceedings." Michael Graves, the defense attorney, rose smoothly from his seat and adjusted his tie. "Your Honor," he began, his tone polite but firm. "While we understand the prosecution's argument for emotional support, the presence of this animal is highly prejudicial. A large German Shepherd in the courtroom may evoke an emotional response from the jury that could unfairly bias them against my client. We request that the dog be removed during testimony." Jenna Collins, the lead prosecutor, stood immediately in response. "Your Honor, Emily Carter is 5 years old and a trauma survivor. She has been diagnosed with selective mutism as a result of her experience. Rex is not here as a spectacle. He is a medically necessary support animal. His presence allows Emily to participate in these proceedings without undue distress." Judge Sullivan sat back, his expression unreadable. "I have already reviewed the documentation submitted by the child psychologist and the animal behaviorist. The dog remains." A murmur spread through the courtroom, some in agreement, others grumbling under their breath. Graves pressed his lips together, displeased but unwilling to argue further. He returned to his seat, shooting a quick glance at Hale, who remained eerily expressionless. The trial began in earnest. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Hale's actions, a pattern of manipulation, deception, and predatory behavior spanning years. Witnesses were called, including the elderly neighbor Martha Jenkins, who recounted the terrifying moment she saw Hale trying to lure Emily into his van. Her voice trembled as she described the way he had grabbed the child's arm before fleeing when confronted. Emily sat silently through it all, her small frame dwarfed by the large wooden chair. Her fingers occasionally flexed around the leash, but she never let go. Whenever the tension became too much, she would look down at Rex, who remained perfectly still, his quiet presence grounding her. Then it was time for her testimony. A hush fell over the courtroom as Emily was gently led to the witness stand. Sarah Carter walked with her, her protective gaze never leaving her daughter. She helped Emily into the seat before stepping away, though every muscle in her body was taut with the desire to scoop her daughter into her arms and take her far from this place. Jenna Collins approached carefully, her demeanor soft and warm. "Hi, Emily," she said with a gentle smile. "I know this is a little scary, but remember, you don't have to say anything you don't want to. You can just nod or shake your head if you feel more comfortable. And if you ever need a break, you can let us know." Emily didn't look at her. Her gaze was fixed on the table, her breathing shallow. But then, as if sensing her unease, Rex pressed his body lightly against her leg. She reached down and gripped a handful of his fur. Slowly she nodded. "Good," Jenna said, keeping her voice light. "Emily, can you tell us who was with you in your yard that day?" Emily hesitated. She didn't lift her head, but after a long moment, she slowly raised her arm and pointed directly at Richard Hale. The defendant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief, involuntary tightening of his jaw. Graves immediately stood. "Objection! The child has been repeatedly shown images of my client prior to trial. This identification is unreliable." Judge Sullivan held up a hand. "Overruled. The jury will determine the credibility of the witness." Jenna continued. "Emily, did this man say anything to you that day?" The child didn't speak. Instead, she made a small movement with her hand, a subtle sign. It was the same signal she had given before, the one that Rex understood. The German Shepherd responded instantly.